Welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to disaster recovery, business continuity, emergency management, COVID, resilience, anything that helps you, your organization, or your community prepare for, respond to, and overcome adverse situations. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, please feel free, reach out. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Alex Fullick there, so I'm really easy to find. Just send me a note and we'll see about getting you on the show. Or if you've got a topic you'd like to hear about, we'll see if I can find someone to come on the show and talk about it. I'd like to announce today that for the Continuity Insights Conference on October 4th to 6th, I'm going to be speaking and hopefully travel to Minneapolis. And I'm also just found out that I will be speaking at the Continuity and Resilience Today conference in Toronto, December 1st to 2nd. Much closer for me, just down the road. Now, today's topic, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. Now, if you've seen the previous episode, my guest, we talked about how business continuity and information security are linked. And we're kind of taking a natural step today to talk about artificial intelligence. So I'd like to welcome back today, Willy Fabritius. Willy, welcome back.
Alex, thank you. Thank you very much for having me back on your show. As usual, very delighted to talk to you. And I hope we can pull off another very exciting broadcast.
I think we can. It can be done. Like the $6 million man, we can do it. Oh, no, that was We Can Rebuild Him. Sorry, I got that wrong there. But we can do it. Just in case anyone didn't see the other episode, could you take a moment and just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do?
Sure. My name is Willy Fabritius. I'm the global head for information security, privacy, and business continuity at BSI, British Standard Institution. And BSI is the national standardization body of the United Kingdom and represents the UK at ISO, the International Standards Organization in Geneva.
Now, we had a great chat the last time, you and I, about BCM and information security. And as I say, we're going to take that a step further today and talk about artificial intelligence. So what is artificial intelligence?
Artificial intelligence, very generically speaking, is some kind of a machine that simulates human intelligence. Whether this is recognizing pictures, whether this is recognizing numbers on a check, whether this is forecasting some events, very generically speaking, simulating human intelligence, but done by a machine.
You mentioned recognizing numbers. So does that mean like a scanner uses some form of artificial intelligence? You know, when they're scanning a credit card or something like that?
A scanner in itself, not. A scanner in itself is nothing else than, let's say, a Linux computer with a camera. Mm-hmm. But obviously, the software running on the scanner, respectively, the software running on your Mac or on your PC, may have some kind of artificial intelligence. But it's definitely built into the ATMs. Because if you deposit a check and it recognizes the amount that is written on the check, there is artificial intelligence behind that. Because it's recognizing the characters. Optical character recognition is an old thing from 30 years ago. But fundamentally, there is something in terms of artificial intelligence behind that, because it's taking the pixels from the camera and then translates that in something different, e.g. a character or a number.
Is it safe to say that artificial intelligence is software-based, not physical?
Yes.
And then that way it can be in all these things, but it doesn't mean a camera itself is artificial intelligence.
That is correct. However,
there's
always an however, right? In order to speed up the process, There are obviously developments to hard code this kind of things onto the hardware level to enhance the recognition speed and the speed with which the AI is actually working. But generically speaking, yes, software-based, correct.
So we mentioned scanners and an ATM and the software. Where is artificial intelligence being leveraged today?
Well,
and are there any instances that might surprise us?
I think the question should be really, where's AI not used?
Oh.
It starts in the morning when you talk to your Alexa friend, or when you talk to your Siri friend, in terms of, turn off the light, turn on the light. This is nothing else than artificial intelligence being used in your home. And no, that was not a slip of my tongue, because I truly believe that AI is everywhere and is posing actually a significant risk we have not really understood yet. So yes, your cell phone is equipped with AI, respectively is utilizing AI, because your voice patterns might be actually being transmitted to a data center, where then an AI is analyzing it and then creates the appropriate actions, respectively translates it into text, whatever the application might be. So to come back to your question, where's AI used? I mentioned already the ATMs. There's obviously text-to-speech, speech-to-text translation, but also translation from one language to the other. As you and most likely the audience have already recognized, I do have a German accent, but I'm living in English-speaking countries for the last 24 years. So sorry, my German is deteriorating by the day. So I have actually problems writing emails in German language. So what I'm now doing is I'm writing the email in English, go to an online translation service and get it translated into German. And on a regular basis, there's just 1 or 2 words that I need to change, but that's still better and faster for me than actually writing it in German language. So that's another example. Other examples could be face recognition. There are millions of cameras out there, and they are equipped with AI features that allow to detect faces and, frankly speaking, to track people.
Well, we're going to get into that in a little bit, because that's part of our issues piece. So don't go too deep into that one yet. You're going to jump ahead on us.
Sorry.
That's okay. So if AI is everywhere and everything, then there obviously must be some what do we call it? Issues, or maybe potential issues with using AI by anybody, really. It could be good guys or bad guys who could be using AI, right? So they could be using it in any way they want to. Hollywood, I don't know if anything Hollywood shows us is real about AI. Sometimes it seems really far-fetched, but what are the key issues related to artificial intelligence?
Artificial intelligence, in the meantime, is so good that it's very, very difficult to humans to recognize that it's there. So you mentioned Hollywood, right? So there is this example of what is called deep fakes. And deep fakes are movies made by AIs that look totally authentic. And whether this is let's make an example. Let's use politicians we all know. Let's say you use Mr. Trump as the face and the body, but Obama as the voice, and the lips would sync totally perfectly.
Didn't that
is just an example
happen? Isn't there something out there that happened like that?
yes, there are numerous examples where fake deeps were used to blackmail people, were used to blackmail women in terms of removing their clothes artificially on the pictures, and that's obviously something that is deeply concerning, as you can imagine.
How do you go about recognizing that? Like, what's real and what's not then? Because I remember seeing that video with President Obama, and it was on the news, and they were showing it, and I was taken aback, and they said it's fake, it's not real. Yes. And then they went and through your explanation. And so how do you recognize that?
Frankly speaking, it's extremely difficult. It's recognized by legislators around the globe. So for example, I just recently learned that the Chinese government is actually working on a law, or has already enacted a law, that requires artificially videos that were created by AI to mark individually and identify them as not real. Whether this is getting done by the bad boys is a totally different story, right? But at least there's some kind of recognition that artificially intelligence being used for film creation, movie creation, can be extremely dangerous.
So how do you, actually, if I ask my question, I know I'm going to be jumping ahead, but how do you go about not allowing that to happen? Because even if that's possible, because if I see the Obama video, and I remember it specifically, that could, my first thought was, I can't believe that he was saying some of these things. That could spread all kinds of other issues and cause other problems when it's fake. So how do you go about corralling the use of artificial intelligence so that it can't be done that way, used that way?
I think the genie is out of the bottle. It's like, how can you prevent that guns are being used to kill people? Can you? You cannot really prevent it. I mean, even the strongest laws will not prevent that people are getting killed by weapons, right? But you can do something after the fact, which is then unfortunately too late. But at the end of the day, I think that's the risk with every technology. A kitchen knife can be used to kill people. An atomic bomb can be used to kill people. Artificial intelligence can be used for the good, and it's being used for the good. And unfortunately, yes, it can also be used for bad things. I think as society, we just simply need to recognize that it's, well, a dual-purpose technology, right? Can be used for good and for bad.
Well, we've talked quite a bit about the bad, and I know we're going to get into some ethical things shortly. But how can artificial intelligence help us for the good? Where is it being used that really benefits people?
Medical applications, identifying illnesses before they materialize themselves. There were studies by search engine providers. We all know them, but obviously we shouldn't name any specific organizations that are pretty. That are able to say or predict whether individuals have a particular illness or not before that person goes to the doctor and has the diagnosis. And it's this kind of search pattern. Let's say you say something like tingling in my hand, right? Next day you say pressure on my chest. Right. Next day you say, I don't know. In the morning when I left my bed, I had problems holding my balance, and so on and so forth. Right. And you search on that search engine. What could it be? What could it be? Right. And just in the time sequence it happens, that can be used to predict that a particular illness is there before the patient even realizes it, before the patient even went to a doctor. Now imagine a medical institution, a doctor's office, would have your medical records in a way that are indeed machine readable, understandable. And all of a sudden it would say, Alex, you know what? You're not in the age group yet, but let's make a cognitive test just to make sure that you are not suffering from Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
Me? Alzheimer's? I remember everything. When I was 10, when I was 20, when I was 5 years old, even from yesterday and today, totally perfect memory. Yeah, but there are certain things in your medical record that might indicate that you have something.
So AI becomes a tool that helps a doctor.
Absolutely.
So just in case a doctor doesn't have all that history or hasn't linked one thing with another, because it could be same symptoms for something completely different.
But in the summary of the symptoms, a symptom 5 years ago and a totally different symptom 2 years ago, and something you have today, in that timeline could be an indicator that a particular illness is manifesting itself in 5 years from now.
And that's definitely, well, in that case, AI is, a bonus, can really be a bonus.
If it is not used against you. Because if that data is available to your employer, if that data is available to your health insurance, that could be potentially used against you.
You know what? On that note, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back, because now we're going to go right into the ethical stuff. And I think that's a perfect segue for it. We're talking today with Willy Fabritius about managing issues with artificial intelligence, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. Today we are talking with Willy Fabritius, and we are talking about managing issues with artificial intelligence. Willy, at the end of the first segment, you started a perfect segue into the ethical concerns with artificial intelligence. And I thought, let's take a look first at the data and privacy, surveillance, and security aspects of artificial intelligence. What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, as I indicated earlier, artificial intelligence is a double-sided sword, right? On one hand, it's extremely powerful to help humanity. Whether this is helping farmers to get a higher yield for from their farm, or whether this is detecting and predicting illnesses, and therefore providing better treatment. But the very same technology could potentially be abused, misused, and one of the biggest concerns is obviously privacy, because at the end of the day, that example what I mentioned earlier with the illness prediction, medical condition prediction, let's assume an employer gets hold of that information, and that may mean you are not getting the promotion because, well, in a year's time from now, you will be in early retirement. Would that be fair? Or let's say,
so what would AI recognize that? Hey, Alex is 64 years old. But would that really be correct? Because people sometimes look older than they actually are, or people look younger than they actually are, and
the age is already known to the HR department, so that's
okay.
Given, right?
Okay.
But what is with your medical condition? Let's say it's not Alex, 64 years old, but let's say you are 35 years old and you are in the middle of your career path, right? And you are very ambitious and you have the right talent, you have the right background, but your medical record tells your employer that your life expectancy is only 42, right? And now the question would be, is that the right person we should promote? And that could be, devastating. But the same could be true for your financial behaviors or for your financial status and whether you get a mortgage or not. So the question is, as usual, what is that AI being used for? And if that data is being used to discriminate against you, then it's a serious issue.
Well, how would people, an employer, get their hands on data like that?
Well, theoretically, they might not or shouldn't.
Yeah.
But who says that somewhere in the future, this is not part of the small print you have signed as an employee? I hereby waive my rights to protect my privacy. And all of a sudden, we may have this kind of discussions.
Well, yeah, that's true. Yeah, it could happen. I wouldn't sign something like that. It's like, no, unless you're planning to share everything about you, I'm not giving you anything about me. Because really, you could be with a company for a long time and have your circumstances change in the middle and be in the exact same position as somebody you're trying to hire with AI and say, no, I don't want that person. But yet you've got the exact same, list of criteria or whatever you want to call it, that you're looking at as the person you're saying, no, we don't want here, which would be kind of odd.
Yeah, or think about that example where the parents of an 14-year-old girl learned that the daughter was pregnant thanks to a big retail store. You say, just hold on, what? Well, that retail store started sending pregnancy commercials, advertisements to the girl, and products for expecting mothers. And obviously, the parents say, that's really strange. Our 14-year-old daughter is getting, diaper commercials. That's really strange. And advertisements for toddler clothes. That's really strange. And then they ask, and it turns out the daughter was pregnant. Now, how is it possible?
And AI already does that, because I go on, I won't name the sites, but I go on a site. If I look at one thing for the next 2 weeks, I get about 100 emails advertising different styles of that one thing. It's like, oh my God.
Exactly. And predicting what happens in the future is not that difficult for a human, right? For a computer system, actually, it is quite challenging. But when you think about the parameters that determine a pregnancy, and when the child is being born, usually 9 months later, there is some kind of natural path that is not that difficult to train an AI.
You mentioned discrimination earlier. How does that come into play?
Let's make an hypothetical example. Let's say you want to train an AI to recognize some kind of illness. Once again, we're back in the medical field, right? But it could be anything and everything. But the data set is coming from Germany. And now let's close our eyes and look at the population in Germany, and you immediately recognize that, well, most likely 90% of the population is Caucasian. That's the data set you are using, right? Now, use that AI, let's say in India or in China or in South Africa. And all of a sudden, you have a problem because the data set is not representing the population you're using the AI for. And the very same could be used in terms of, the zip code where a person lives is not necessarily determining the race, but the income level maybe is determined by the zip code. And all of a sudden you realize that, redlining is actually codified in the AI. And by the way, that's a real example. It happened to a bank, right? Where they used traditional data, and all of a sudden they were discriminating against people from certain ethnic groups.
I guess the same thing could happen with names too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because in today's world, it doesn't matter what color or religion you are. You could have a name that sounds that it's from the other side of the world, because people are more aware of, different exotic kind of sounding names. So they name their babies, after a name that comes from, some other country in the world. And I guess AI can also take that into account, oh, that person must automatically be from such and such area when they're not.
Absolutely. Or there was the example, classical discrimination. Now, the good news is that system didn't go into production. It was just a research project. But that company trained the AI for hiring applications, or for the purpose of hiring people, right? And they obviously trained the AI with the current and previous employee data, because that is the ideal candidate we are looking for, right? Sounds great on surface. However, they realized very, very quickly that the AI was automatically eliminating every single person who graduated from all-female universities.
Oh, really?
Oops. Right?
Yeah.
Oops.
Big oops.
And they didn't check for the gender, because that would be illegal, right? But the moment a candidate said, I graduated from this university, which just happens to be an all-woman university, guess what? That candidate was eliminated.
Come off the list. Well, I know I've had an issue with AI with a few months back. I think I mentioned on the show once before that I applied for a contract position and went through everything that needed to be, and I knew they used AI because it came back. I got an email coming back a couple of days later saying, we've reviewed your application and you've never worked in the business continuity industry. Well, I've got 23 years, several books, spoken at conferences. What do you mean? I've never? There's something wrong with your algorithms, obviously. I just chuckled and shrugged it off and moved on. But
your resume just simply did not contain that one specific keyword, whatever that keyword may have been.
Yeah, and it could have even been spelt wrong at their end. So I just thought it was kind of funny. Like, oh, really?
Okay. Funny on one hand, but I think you should be grateful that you didn't get that job, because it really tells you something about that company.
That's true. Well, that kind of moves me into the next piece, and I wanted to separate it out a little bit, is the biases. Now, you mentioned, you used the phrase train AI. So I'm assuming, and I may play the dummy here, I'm assuming for AI to train it, I as a person would have to be configuring it or programming it or giving it conditions. I'm not sure what the right phrasing would be, to make sure that it does what I want it to do. But when I'm doing that, am I kind of putting my biases into that AI without knowing it? Is that a concern?
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So in very generic terms, how it happens, there is a pre-configured AI that doesn't know anything. You feed it with data where you do know the expected outcome. You then compare the expected outcome with the actual outcome of the algorithm or the AI, and then feed it back. If the two match, if the expected outcome matches with the result from the AI, positive feedback. If not, negative feedback. Now imagine you do that not once, not hundreds, but hundreds of thousands of times. So over time, the AI is adjusting its decision-making process. And therefore, over time, creates better and better results. And that is then obviously called the learning phase, the training phase. Now imagine these data sets, these training data sets, tainted in one way or the other. Only young people, only old people, only, I don't know, people with hair on the head or without hair on the head, right? Doesn't really matter. And all of a sudden, you realize that the AI is trained in a particular way. And that's what it's going to do. And that means that by using questionable, incorrect test data, you will introduce automatically some kind of bias towards that incorrect data.
So would I be doing that consciously or subconsciously?
No.
Would I even know that I'm doing that?
You would not necessarily know that, because how can you as a human possibly know whether all these hundreds, thousands of pictures you are training the AI with, or all the hundreds, thousands of medical records you are training the AI with, have not some kind of cultural bias, some kind of historic bias, some kind of whatever bias, right?
Right.
So no, it's not done intentionally, but
right.
you know.
But it could be intentional if it's those kind of examples we gave earlier about discrimination.
Oh yes. Oh yes. So if somebody really has bad intentions, that person or that group of people actually could intentionally mistrain, if that is the right word, miscondition the AI to come to, from their perspective, positive results, but obviously from an society perspective, extremely questionable results.
And I think that's a perfect spot to end our second segment, because we're going to talk about regulatory issues in our final segment. So we're talking with Willy Fabritius today, managing issues with artificial intelligence, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. We are talking with Willy Fabritius today about managing issues with artificial intelligence. Willy, great first and second segments. In this one, I'd like to start. Are there any regulatory items that we need to consider with regards to artificial intelligence? Is there anything out there yet, or is it still, being looked at?
Still under development. As usual, regulators and legislators are on a regular basis a little bit behind what happens. But I think that we can say for sure that both in, actually not both, in major economic areas, the EU, as well as in the US, as well as in China, regulators and legislators have recognized the, let's say, problem or potential problems. And just recently, I think 2 weeks ago or 10 days ago, something like that, the European Commission published a draft document for using AI, and it's remarkably similar to what we know from the famous GDPR. And I know that the House of Representatives in the United States is also talking about it, and is actually in contact with their European counterparts, interesting enough, to think about regulation of AI. So it's coming.
What kind of things are they talking about? Kind of the bias, the discrimination, the privacy? Like, are they looking at all that stuff?
That is definitely part of it, but they also have. So I'm now talking about the European draft legislation, because that's in the public domain and readily available. It's identifying applications of AI from low risk to super high risk. And what would be, for example, a super high risk? Guess what? Industrial control systems for nuclear power stations, but also children's toys.
Children's toys.
And you say, exactly, right? And just hold on. Nuclear power stations, I get somehow, but children's toys? Why would that be high risk? Well, invasion of privacy and abuse of children. And yes, there were examples in the past where dolls, toys were equipped with microphones and loudspeakers, and guess what? They had an IP address and were hacked. And then some people from outside were talking to the child or to the children. Not obviously in a good way, as you can imagine. Yeah. And the rest is history, right?
I remember that, quite some time ago. Yeah, I remember that. Wow. So where can actually people find that? Because I'd be interested in reading that. Is it on if I just do a search on EU artificial intelligence paper and see what crops up?
I do have the URL, but not at my fingertips.
Okay, that's
I definitely can find it out for you, and then maybe we can provide it to the listeners if they ask for it.
That would be great, because I'd like to put that in the video description.
Sure.
So people can click on and have a look at that, because that's something I think I'd be interested in reading, especially because I'm wondering, will that incorporate other aspects and legislative articles that are out there, like the recently operational resilience that came from the Bank of England, the Financial Control Authority, FCA stuff. Because I would assume, in all that, artificial intelligence is involved on some level. So with artificial intelligence in business continuity, well, how can artificial intelligence help business continuity? We might as well take that next logical step.
That's a very good question, and I do like it because finally we see some positive use, right? It's not just abusing children; it's something doing something good for humanity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about business continuity, I'm obviously thinking about business impact analysis. I'm thinking about risk assessment. I'm thinking about forecasting events. And I think that this would be wonderful examples where AI system actually can be used and most likely will be used to prevent real disasters. From underground detection of seismic activities and therefore predicting earthquakes to therefore predicting tsunamis. That is a very simple kind of stuff, right? But I also can see that AIs could be used in terms of predicting the impact of a ship stranded in the Suez Canal. And then say, if that happens for 5 days, for 2 days, for 10 days, what will be the impact? And that is, a recent example. And then we can obviously simulate that in terms of what happens if a ship is torpedoed and sunk in the Gulf of Persia, in the Persian Gulf, right? Or in the Strait of Hormuz, or wherever, right? And all of a sudden, if you're now an organization that is in the logistics business, you can now simulate what happens, right? And therefore, you then can obviously predict what might be the safest route for your cargo at a particular moment in time.
Well, I've got a feeling that Suez Canal, the answer a few weeks ago or a month and a half ago, would be different than what we would get now, for sure.
Yes, and the raw data is out there. I mean, ships were stranded in the Panama Canal, in the Suez Canal, ever since those channels were open, right? Mm-hmm. But it's historic data, and the question is really, how can we use that to predict the impact in the future? It will happen again. The only question is when, right? And then we need to be prepared.
With all those events, and if it can be used for business continuity management, would the business continuity management be feeding AI this information to help? Would they?
Yes, yes. As indicated earlier, AIs are being trained, and obviously they need to be the training starts with a training set, right? But ideally, they would be constantly being trained with constantly updated data. And therefore, over time, obviously, getting more and more up to date and being able to better predict the future.
Could a business continuity management person or disaster recovery person, whatever their title is, link their, let's say, the business continuity management software to news feeds to feed their AI that way? Is there potential for that?
Absolutely. There is actually software out there and organizations that are constantly collecting news feeds and digest them. But right now, that's mainly done by humans. But obviously, you can envision that this is getting done more and more by computers. A classical example is the sentiment analysis of Twitter feeds. The moment people enter company's name with a positive name, with a positive word that has a certain point, and same company name with a negative meaning has a certain meaning, and therefore over time you can recognize and measure the sentiment for that particular company or against that particular company. But that's not even AI. That's just number crunching. But now you can envision that this company and that company and that company together may have some kind of connection, whatever that connection might be. And that might be not necessarily obvious for humans, but an AI might be able to detect that.
Now, there's one, we're getting to the last little bit of our last segment here, but there was one topic I was hoping you could take a couple of minutes just to quickly talk about that we had on our list, and it was governance of the entire life cycle of AI systems. And to be honest, I'm not sure what that is. Can you explain that one?
Sure. I'm the kind of guy who talks in examples. And recently I was invited to a panel discussion about information security. And we all agreed that it looks like that security is an afterthought. People design the software, write the code, implement the software, deploy the software, and then somebody says, did we think about security? Oops, we didn't. That's too late. And I think the same is true for AI. And the real question is there some kind of mechanism that allows us to manage the entire life cycle from the ideation phase, the concept phase, to the prototyping phase, and yes, to the retirement phase of that particular AI. And that is a quite complex process. And when we then include on top of that we may not even develop the AI engine ourselves because we are using a supplier, and maybe we are not even using our data set, but the data set of somebody else, supplier, all of a sudden we have an entire ecosystem of organizations involved. And that in itself requires governance, requires structure. And one of the best approaches for governance are management systems. We know management systems from quality, ISO 9001. We know it from BCM, ISO 22301. And guess what? There is an ISO standard under development for the management system of an AI.
I was going to ask you if there was
ISO 40001, 42001.
42001?
Yes. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, it's only at a working document stage. So that's, I believe, stage 3 out of 7 before it's being published as a standard. So it's very, very early in the ideation phase.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that it's structured very, very similar, like well-known ISO standards, like the one I mentioned earlier. Because at the end of the day, you always need to know in what context you work. You need to know the scope. You need to have management responsibility, internal audits, improvements, risk assessment, right? So all the typical stuff or items will be in that standard.
Well, I was going to ask you if there was a standard, because you mentioned them, BCM, they all exist. And with life cycles, I'm familiar with the project management life cycle and SDLC life cycles and all that. And then I was wondering, okay, well, if AI is so new, is there even anything that represents that life cycle? But it's in progress.
It's in progress.
We won't see it for a while, but it's in progress.
I'm hopeful that in this case it will not take 10 years. In this case, it might be a little bit faster, because I think that everybody involved, from users, and I'm not talking about Alex and Willy as users, but users as in industrial users, commercial users, and providers and regulatory authorities, they recognize that there is the need to have something, right? And that something is most likely an ISO standard.
We only have about 2.5 minutes left. Do you have any final thoughts on artificial intelligence?
As indicated earlier, fundamentally, I'm very optimistic. I always try to see the good in things, and not focus on the negative. So if I'm pointing out the negative components, that's not meant in a way that I say don't use AI. I'm doing that for the purpose of raising awareness. You know, it's like a parent that teaches a child not to touch the hot oven. It's not about not touching the oven. It's really about not getting injured. And it's not about the oven shall not be used. No, the oven shall be used to cook food, but it shall not be used to, put the hamster on it, or the bird on it. So that's the kind of philosophy I have with AI. Prudent use, yes. Careful use, absolutely. But we also need to be aware that it potentially could be used against us, and we need to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with you completely. Willy, thanks very much for your expertise and time. I really appreciate it. And check out Willy's other episode on the show, where we talked about how BCM and InfoSec, are linked. Another great episode, lively chat as well, just as this one was. So thanks again, Willy. I really appreciate your time. And to everybody watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody.
Thank you very much.
If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.